This is the most disappointing book I've read. My experience going into it is, oh, okay, Dan, Abe, main character's awesome. And then I read this whole completely different story with a complete set of different characters. I'm just thinking, when are we gonna get back to Dan and Abe? When are we getting back to Dan and Abe? So I read The Fisherman. I enjoyed it. It had a problem with setting expectations. So basically, this book is about this guy. His name is Abe. His wife ends up dying from cancer. Now the story takes place a few years after that. But distraught and everything, he starts fishing as like a pastime, and he really gets into fishing and it becomes his hobby. That's all he does other than work. That's the only thing he does. After work, he goes straight to fishing, and that's what he's enveloped his life with after the death of his wife. So then where the story picks up, or like where it starts, one of his coworkers, his family ends up dying of a tragic car wreck, and he's the only one that survives. Basically, the two end up going fishing together, and that's where the story goes. It's called The Fisherman, right? That's pretty much what you would expect. So at the beginning, where I'm getting to know Abe, and Dan is the other character that his family also dies. Getting to know these characters, I was loving it. That first part, I loved it. That's one of the good things this book does. It's just so good at the characters. It's like the characters feel real, but just all the small things that the characters do, like when they're alone and all that, is just makes the characters feel so real. And that's definitely the strongest part about this book. Everyone feels so real. They may not be as complex as like A Song of Ice and Fire, but they feel very real. And that's what hooked me. That's why I love the beginning so much. It's just because I was loving getting to know these characters and getting to know the past and getting to know how real they felt. Then comes my complaint. So basically, these two characters decide to go fishing in this obscure, it's called Dutchman's Creek. They decide to go fishing here. It's very obscure, no one really knows about it. When they go, they stop at a bar and they talk to the owner of the bar. And that's when this book goes off the rails a little bit. Basically, the owner of this bar, I don't know if it's actually the owner, but I'm pretty sure it's the owner. He starts talking to our two main characters. He tells them a story about why Dutchman's Creek is called Dutchman's Creek. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that this story goes on for at least half the book. And that's the problem. This story overstayed its welcome by a lot. And it was a good story, but it was like, it's just very jarring because it's like, oh, I got to know these two characters. I love these characters. Oh, suddenly I'm thrust into a completely different story with its own cast of characters, and now I'm getting to know all these new characters all of a sudden and that's the problem with this book, is it's 1.5 stories. And that one is the one that's not the main one. The actual main story is only like half a story, while this story that's supposed to be like foreshadowing is actually the story. And because it takes up at least half the book, and it's good. Like, granted, this story is good. I like the characters in it. I liked it was a complete story beginning to end, even with the resolution, which I thought was weird. Because like when I'm first reading, I'm like, oh, this will be a couple chapters, and so I'm enjoying it, and then it really kind of drags. I'm like, all right, that's kind of weird, and it drags more. I'm like, we're not done with the story. What's going on? And then it drags more. I'm like, what is going on? And finally, I get to the climax, and the climax happens, and just after the fact, I'm like, okay, so it can end now. No, it still goes for like 2 or 3 more chapters for a resolution for these characters, and I'm like, is this the actual story here? Because there's nothing wrong with that is. I just felt like the B plot, the B story, is really taking the forefront of the story. And that's the issue, because like when I'm starting it, I'm marketed as, oh, I'm following Abe and Dan. They're the main characters. It's their story that's happening. And then after the B story is told and we return to Dan and Abe, it's only like 2 or 3 chapters and then it's over. I was like, I just was very taken off guard because I was introduced into the book following Dan and Abe, and I was told that Dan and Abe were the main characters, and that's what the bulk of the story was going to follow. But then the book didn't deliver on that, and instead the bulk of the story followed these other random characters that from this other random story that they were told. And initially I thought this story was like meant as like foreshadowing, but it was blown way to the extreme, and that's why it's just so mid. Because like ultimately it's a good story, good characters, but it just has this identity crisis of these 2 stories, And that's what really just makes it so mid. Basically, my experience going into it is, oh, okay, Dan Abe, main character, is awesome. Can't wait to see what horror story this turns into with them. And then I read this whole completely different story with a complete set of different characters. That was good, but it just wasn't what I expected. And so the whole time while I'm reading the bulk of the story, the main story, I'm just thinking, when are we gonna get back to Dan and Abe? When are we getting back to Dan and Abe? So I couldn't enjoy the actual main story as much as I could have. So that's the whole thing. That's the thing. What I'm thinking about the whole time I'm reading that. Finally, you go back to Dan and Abe, and it's like 2 chapters done. And I'm like, there was no story there. There was no story with Dan and Abe. What the heck? I was like, nothing happened with them. They had one encounter with these strange forces from the other story, from the B story. One encounter. The main character, like, I don't know, kind of almost died, but it was one encounter, and then it's good. It's done. And I'm just like, the story would have benefited way more if the author had just cut out the Dan and Abe stuff completely and just focused on that B story and had just had that in the main story. This story would have benefited so much more because it was a complete story beginning to end. Like, had the setup, the like exposition, and then it had rising actions and more rising actions, and then it had the climax, and then it had the falling actions, and then it had the resolution. It was a complete story, this B story, but it was a B story, which just doesn't add up. It should have been the main story because it was complete. And that's what I was thinking while reading the resolution for this B story, is I was just thinking, this is so weird that this story is getting a resolution, because I was thinking that this was just an element of the main story, but no, it was the main story. That's why I got a resolution. And so personally, it just feels weird and awkward how it's set up. While the actual main story following Dan and Abe, it's only like, it's like exposition. Doesn't even really have much of an inciting incident. It's like exposition, maybe slight rising actions, and then you get the whole B story, and then you get the inciting incident for Dan and Abe, and then just a little bit more rising action, and then it's like not even. It's like after the whole B story, it's like inciting incident, climax, resolution. And it's just strange because the B story, the climax was way bigger than the climax for the Dan and Abe story, which was supposed to be the main story. Like, this could have been done well is if there's an extra 100 pages added, and Dan and Abe's story after the B story was more fleshed out, and a lot more happened, and it was a lot more like rising actions, and the climax for Dan and Abe also served as a resolution for the B story, which is what I thought it was gonna do. Because like the B story, the resolution ends off as, oh, we saved, I guess it's the world from this like paranormal bad guy, but only for a certain amount of time. It's not forever. And so I'm thinking, okay, so that's where this fits into Dan and Abe's story. Dan and Abe are gonna go, they're gonna encounter this paranormal bad guy again, and they're the ones that are gonna solve it for the rest of the time. But then no, they don't even do that. Like, if anything, it's like they didn't actually do anything. Literally, Dan encounters the paranormal bad guy, then Abe. Abe encounters, well, Dan and Abe encounter this paranormal bad guy. Abe almost dies, Dan does die, and then the book's over. Like, they encounter him, Abe almost dies, resolution. Like, they didn't wrap anything up, which is what I thought it was going to do, which is, I feel like the only way it could have integrated this B story, where it's featured so heavily into the Dan and Abe story, because it just would have tied them together if Dan and Abe had like defeated this paranormal bad guy for the rest of the time, because it just would have like solved it, I guess. But it just doesn't. It's just organized in a weird way, and just that weird organization just really hurts the story. It really does. Like, it's a phenomenal story. I think it's a good story. It's good characters, but it's just organized in such a weird way that it really hurts the story, and it just caps it off. And it just could have been so much better if it was just organized better. And that's all I have to say. It should have been organized better. Yeah, overall, it was mid. It wasn't bad. Like, if you don't have anything else to read, sure, pick this up. But don't expect it to be the best thing you've ever read. That's the end of this video. Feel free to comment how I'm wrong in the comments and how this book is actually good. I'd love to hear different thoughts about it. I haven't really heard anything about this book, to be honest. And if you have any suggestions for other books I should read, feel free. There's a lot of books I haven't read any Brandon Sanderson. I haven't read a lot of books, so if there's any books you think I should read or you want to hear my thoughts on, yeah, comment below what you think I should. If you want to see more, I have reviews for all of A Song of Ice and Fire. Feel free to watch those. And yeah, that's the end of this video.